Welcome to the Today Dreamer podcast. My name is Michael. I'm a meditation teacher, a musician, a mentor, and a conversationalist based currently in Melbourne, Australia. And the podcast is here to help you cultivate your practice of presence so that you may more fully participate and contribute to the blossoming of the emergent world story as it unfolds. That's my intention, and hopefully by the end of this chat you'll have some clarity, inspiration, and possibly some motivation towards that participation and contribution. Today's guest is Jenny Thirtle. Jenny is the Assistant Director and Teacher at the School for FM Alexander Studies. So as part of her work at the school, she runs groups and masterclasses for the Voice and Performance Days. So since graduating from the Melbourne Alexander Teacher Training School in 1996, Jenny has also maintained a private practice where she teaches musicians and members of the general public who are in pain. She's run 12-week courses at the Victorian College of Arts, Music Department, and the Media Conservatorium for their bachelor degrees. Currently, she's teaching at the VCA in the drama department. So prior to her Alexander training, Jenny studied and performed as an opera singer. She began her music training in 1979 in Wellington, and she played in many groups and orchestras, including the Youth Orchestra of New Zealand. Whilst in the UK, Jenny has studied singing, languages, and all things relating to performance. So, I came across the Alexander technique fairly recently through a beautiful friend of mine, Joanna, and she introduced me to Jenny. And this opened up a beautiful world of exploration, which I'm so excited, and I feel blessed to be able to share this with you today. Because the Alexander technique, as you'll soon find out, is just a wonderful space of exploration and has a lot of beautiful parallels that can help us connect more deeply to our body and to the practice of presence. So, before we do get into things with Jenny, I'd like to invite you to take a breath in with all of us here listening, beyond time and space, and come into our own state of presence so that we may possibly more fully absorb these beautiful sharings that Jenny has to offer. So I'd like to gently invite you to close your eyes wherever you are, and no matter what's been happening in your day or your week, see if we can come into a space of connection, of deep connection with our breath in this moment. Feel free to gently take an in-breath in through your nostrils. See if you can take it in really slowly. Whenever it is that you may reach the peak, feel free to pause for a moment, noticing the subtleties of your experience before gently and just as gracefully releasing on the out-breath. Repeating the process as many times as you like as we move into things.
So with Alexander technique, we're looking at those really deeply ingrained patterns. We're looking at it from the perspective of a whole organism, let's say, so the whole of the human being. So the thinking and physicality, there is no separation. So patterns that we have that are that seem to be physical also have habitual mental processes that go with them. And so how those things come about really are determined by our experiences in our life, our physicality, what we're sort of born with, our hereditary, if you like, and the experiences that we have. And a lot of those things that start to arise may well have served us very well at some point or another. We don't really do things in a way that's to harm ourselves, not usually, but the patterns that we build, we don't realize are sitting there, and they become fairly ingrained. And then they no longer serve us. So with Alexander technique, we're really looking at how are those patterns informing our everyday life. And so we teach people how to start to look at them and to change them, really.
That sounds quite powerful. And I kind of wanted to know a little bit more about the technique itself, because it seems like this is only how it seems. So I could be wrong, but you know, let me know, kind of help me out with this. But it seems as though it's something that I haven't really heard much of, and it doesn't seem like a lot of people know about the technique. So I was wondering, you know, maybe it would be good to kind of share a little bit about what goes on and how that process comes to be, before going a bit deeper in the direction that we were heading.
Okay, so maybe if I tell you what Alexander's story was, it might help to kind of give us a framework of how this came about. So he was an actor and orator in the days when people used to read to an audience. And he found that he kept losing his voice. And in those days, he would go off to a doctor or a physician, and they would give him remedies and sprays and prescribe rest. And then he'd get back on stage and he would keep losing his voice. And it culminated in a very important performance that he had, where he said to his doctor, what am I going to do? You know, and the doctor said, right, rest for X number of weeks, don't do any vocalizing, and then you'll be right. So that's what he did. His speaking voice was fine, but as soon as he got back on stage and was in performance mode, he halfway through the performance completely lost his voice. So then he decided it must be something that he was doing to himself. And that was where he started. He thought, right, mirrors. He set up a lot of mirrors around himself, and he started investigating what was he doing that was different when he was speaking normally and when he was performing. And he made the discovery of certain physical things that he was doing to interfere with his whole self. It took him another 15 years of experiments and investigations to really find out all these little things that were arising. So he was finding that it wasn't just a physicality. It was something to do with the way he conceptualized the act of speaking in public. And so he had to really start to look at how did that thinking impact his physicality. And he realized that we were looking at a psychophysical coordination of a whole system. So he came up with some physical things that were interesting, in that the relationship of his head to his spine, to the rest of his body, was impacting what happened. But in order to change that, he had to see what he was doing with his mind, his thinking, and start to investigate, well, when I go to do that particular activity, I tighten and disorganize my head and neck in this particular way. How can I now change that? And so he came up with his two favorite words, really, is inhibition and direction. And so he had to observe what he was doing. He then had to say, I don't want to do that, I'd like to energize myself to do this new thing. So it was a huge discovery, really. And in the relationship of the head to the whole of the body, but also then the way that we think when we do this.
Yeah. So there's this kind of aspect of developing a sense of awareness or a presence in the body. And I think if looking deeply into a lot of spiritual traditions, you see this as well. So there's an interesting kind of link I can see forming already there. And I think there's a sense also of, deepening that presence in the body brings you deeper into the present moment, because you're right here. You're not off somewhere else, because you are kind of in tune. And I guess the question comes up for me is developing that communication, or even being able to kind of witness that gaps to be able to make a difference or to be able to change direction. I mean, it sounds like he has spent a lot of effort and a lot of diligence kind of working and experimenting and finding a way through. Is there anything in that area that comes up for you that you may like to share about the specifics of what that process may look like with this specific technique?
So he did this all himself, and if we were as diligent, we could do the same.
Mm-hmm.
However, he devised a way, I suppose, of using his hands to help guide people in the direction that they need to go, so that it sort of fast tracks it. It's like we can start to come, as we use our hands, we guide people into a better coordination so they can see how their thinking affects this physicality, that there's actually no separation. So the use of the hands in teaching the technique is actually part of it. And that's a skill that's learned over a period of 3 years of training. So he did use his hands when he was training people. And that's what he taught people to do, as well as observing and using verbal cues as well.
Yeah. And how do you know where the right place to be is another question that comes up, because it's like, okay, you're kind of seeing someone and you're using your hands, but like, even when you're looking at yourself through all these mirrors, like, where are you meant to be in comparison to where you are,
So that's a good question. So there's really no, well, there's an optimal organization of the physicality, and it facilitates ease of movement and a sense of ease in our body.
Mm-hmm.
So if when we move, we suddenly find that we're restricted in some way, we can be pretty sure that we're kind of a little bit off track. So, pushing through pain and that sort of thing is actually not really something that we would encourage people to do, but we would encourage them to stop and start to think about am I sitting down on myself with my head and trying to do movement and it's restricted? And then we'd start to guide someone to allow their head to move and not be stuck. So we're wanting the head to be mobile in all directions, not held, but not collapse either. So it's a very delicate sort of balance with the head. It suddenly facilitates a coordination through the whole of the spine and torso. That means we can move easily. It also means we can start to see when we are going ahead to do something, and that thing, we have a reaction that's squashing or collapsing in response to the action. That's where our mind comes into it. So we're always responding as human beings. What we want to get to know is whether the response is one of expansion or one of contraction. And we all know the one of contraction really easily, which is, we get a fright and that's immediately what we do. And this is a life-saving mechanism, but we don't want to be there all the time. So, you could take something as simple as a task. Say, for instance, if I asked someone to sit down, they could just give themselves a moment to think, well, okay, well, do I just do it reactively, or can I take some agency over this and have a sense of length and clearness of my mind? I decide when I sit down and then at what speed. So I'm not letting my pattern of just reacting take over.
Yeah, this is something that really interests me, because what you kind of just pointed to in that moment was this. It kind of connects to this idea of that every motion that we do on the deepest level has a ripple out into reality, and there's an effect that comes out from that, whether we see it or not. So if we're able to realize, and this is almost like a physically embodied version of that, or a space to begin or something. If we're able to work on that on a really micro level, the impacts, I believe, could be quite profound when they ripple out. And this could, as far as we zoom out, this could be affecting generations to come. If we're connecting if we're looking at what our thoughts are, our intentions, and then our movements throughout, this life, and how they do have a flow on effect, and how it begins with this sense of presence in this moment, and coming back into what we're actually up to, rather than being off somewhere else on this kind of ingrained habitual motion.
Yeah. So, in a sense, you could say that what we're looking at is when people are throwing themselves forward into the future, worrying about what's coming up, or anticipating what's coming up, which takes us completely, it disconnects us from the physicality. Physicality then has to just take care of itself. Or we might be remembering something from the past and dragging that experience with us.
Mm.
So then we're no longer actually right in the moment again. However, that doesn't mean that we can't learn from our experience, and we can't, or that we can't plan. So planning for a future event has to be happening right now. That is my action. My action is to coordinate, to plan for something that's coming up, not to be in it and disconnected. So the technique gives us an opportunity to go, okay, my thinking and physicality are one thing. And so everything that I think has a physical component to it, whether I know it or not. The more skilled we become at applying the tools of the technique, the more we can start to see those really deeply ingrained things. We can see ourselves sort of throwing forward and anticipating, and not actually taking the time now to take the steps towards the thing that we're doing.
Mm.
And so each step along the way is a moment of right now, not a throwing forward, even by 10 seconds. It's like, no, I don't want to be worrying about the thing that's going to happen in 3 months' time, but I want to be planning the steps I'm going to take towards it and stay present as I do that. So it's kind of interesting in that what Alexander found was that he said end gaining, that action of throwing forward into the future, is the thing that undoes all of us.
Can you tell me some, I know we've been kind of dancing and speaking around this, but I'd like to know more about this end gaining thing and what else his discoveries were, and maybe what some of your discoveries around end gaining in your own life may have been as well.
Yeah. So the idea of end gaining is where you could say, that old saying, the end justifies the means.
Mm.
So that's, in Alexander world, that's like, no, it does not.
Yeah.
And so by staying present to what I'm actually doing right now, coordinating my mind and body in right now, means I can take the next step and the next step and the next step towards the thing that I have an intention for. So the difference between having an intention and a final goal that I'm striving for are subtly different, but it's really important, because I think a lot of the time when people start learning Alexander technique, they think, oh, I'm not allowed to have a goal. Yes, you can. We can't function without having some sort of, plan for our lives. But we don't want to be grasping them before they've arrived. So it's like that whole end gaining thing is about coming back to now and noticing that I've got an intention for that thing. Now I know the pathway I need to take each moment to get there.
And it feels like sometimes the thing that we've got the intention for may look different to what we envision it in this moment. You know what I mean? Like we don't know how that's going to come about or come together because we're not in that space.
That's right. And so if you have, say, for instance, if you look at a performer, somebody who's, so my world was the classical singing world. So if I were planning to, there's a performance in 6 weeks, if I was focused on that end, then I'd just get completely sort of discoordinated, because my body would be here today and my mind is worrying about what's happening in 6 weeks. So coming back here, taking the steps to do what has to be done in order to head for that, means that I can then change things in the moment. If suddenly things take a different turn, it's like, okay, somebody's just asked me I have to sing that from up on the top of something. Well, I didn't think about that one, 3 weeks ago, but if I can stay present, that is no problem.
Yes. It's like it's like you'll handle it when the time is right, and it will present itself in the perfect way, as long as you there's a sense of trust in that as well, I feel.
Yes, and that trust has to be built up through lessons, regular lessons, so that a person can start to learn to trust their thinking, their new thinking.
Yeah.
Because in the beginning, it does feel a bit like stepping off into the unknown.
And it seems like there's quite a bit of beauty that may arise as well, because I'm just kind of getting this link between, there's this wonderful teacher of mine, I'm not sure if you've come across his work, Thich Nhat Hanh, and he's got this kind of idea of, even with his footsteps, that is the end, in a sense, that the means, or whatever, it's the other way around, because the footsteps are actually what matter, not where you're going, and there's a beauty in each step as well.
That's right. And so you're balancing these two things really against each other. So this moment of that foot going down is a whole thing in itself, as we then take the next one, which then means I've arrived at the thing that I was going to be doing. The final intention, performance, or whatever it happens to be.
This is like, it's wonderful to hear about this technique and to learn more about this, and how, just the beautiful kind of links between it and life, and how kind of, how alive that is for me in my exploration at the moment. So I appreciate you sharing this. This is like, this is quite exciting. And this idea of kind of everything being interconnected, and how different parts of our being, whether it's our, within our psyche or within the physical body, how they kind of compensate for areas of tension, or kind of, and then, maybe you've got a pain up here, but it's really, something down here, and the link between tension and emotions is coming up as well. So it's quite a lot, you're talking about also posture and endurance and coordination and all these like kind of aspects. You throw in emotions in the mix, it seems quite overwhelming.
Yeah. And so we start very gently with people. We start, if you like, on the outside. So a person may come because they've got some pain. So we're looking very much at the physicality in that moment to find out what they're doing in that moment that is probably causing that pain. Now we're talking about pain that's a bit like non-specific. There's a lot of non-specific back pain. People don't have ruptured discs or anything like that. They've just got pain. And usually that's because their what we say is misusing themselves. Now, when I talk about yourself or oneself, we're talking about my thinking, my history, my physicality, my emotions, my spiritual life. All of it is myself. None of it can be left out because it's all influencing everything. Mm-hmm. So we take a step back from that because that's overwhelming, as you said. We go, okay, so if this person has got a pain in their back, in their lumbar, what are they doing on the surface that I can see to create that pain? And usually people are pulling their head back. And so as soon as the head goes back, the lumbar spine, you could try it, just collapse your head back a bit and you find that something moves in your lumbar. Mm. And then when we think about the head just balancing a little bit forward, up, the spine can elongate. The head goes back and we've either got to fight it and tighten or we collapse. And so just something like that, as simple as that, we put our hands on, move a person's head and move them into the chair, in and out of a chair, to practice getting the head releasing for their back to lengthen so they're not compressing themselves. That's the start. Then what happens is that we say, well, okay, I'm going to ask you to go and sit in the chair. And as soon as you ask somebody to sit down, then all their baggage, if you like, that's attached to that activity starts to fire up again. They pull their head back, they compress their back. So what is that? That's their reaction, their inbuilt pattern to the task of sitting down that they didn't know they were doing. So we say, well, okay, let's see if you can just hear me ask you to sit down without reacting in that way. Can you instead ask your head to continue to release away for your back to lengthen? And don't actually sit down yet. Don't do the task, but notice the reaction in your mind and all the activation that starts to bubble up before you've even got to sit down. This is how we then start to intercept how our thinking affects the way we move. So posture, in a sense, is not a thing. It's actually an expression of how we're organizing ourselves. So as Alexander teaches, we're not really overly concerned with posture. The posture will improve as a result of an improved organization of thinking.
Interesting when we think about the idea of posture, like the posture of our lives, maybe.
Yeah, it's a posture of mind as well, isn't it? I mean, that used to be an old saying, you know, if somebody was doing something, say, well, they're posturing. They're sort of doing something in their mind as well.
Yeah.
And it's really so connected in that way.
So what kind of got you onto the Alexander technique? What got you interested in? What was your kind of first glimpse into this? And maybe where was this excitement? It seems that you have. Where was that born?
So I was an opera singer many years ago, a young opera singer, and I was very fortunate. I had an opportunity to work in a repertory theatre and doing singing as well. And a director there had just come, I was living in New Zealand at the time, and he'd just come back from the UK and he said, oh, I found this thing called the Alexander technique. I'll show you. And my antenna went up and I was going, I'm sure you can't show me without having learned how to do it. So I'm not going to have you put your hands on me and sort of pretend. Anyhow, my antenna had gone up and I thought, oh, this thing sounds really fascinating, because actors and musicians, their body is their tool of trade, as is their thinking, their conceptualization for characterization and musicianship and all that. So that started something in my mind. And then finally, when I did go back to the UK to study further, I went and had Alexander lessons. So my singing teacher at the time used to send all his students off to an Alexander teacher. And I just got totally fascinated by it. And to the point where 8 years of lessons, I went, I think I've got to teach this. So I trained and stopped being a performer, but started teaching Alexander technique and teaching musicians, because what I found was I had my singing teacher, I had my Alexander teacher, and I couldn't quite work out, how does this work in the same room? It was a bit mysterious to me. So I really decided that I had to kind of find out, how do I teach people who are musicians to put this into practice in order to make their lives easier. They can play more, better, easier, more fluidly, more creatively.
It seems like it would fit in so well for so many people's lives, not just musicians, like and actors. Like, it just seems like it's real. The deep core of what we're talking about is, quite universal.
It is, and I think that's it's fantastic. It just is something you apply to everything. And for people who are doing things at a high level, they don't have much leeway for error. Mm-hmm. Most of us, in everyday life, we can sort of pick up something a bit badly and we can get away with it for a while. But a high level musician or sports person, they don't have a lot of leeway. They're really finely tuned, and they just have to deviate slightly in their use, and they can do some harm.
And in your own life, have you noticed that maybe the question would be, in what ways have you noticed it kind of flowing in, maybe even into your relationships as a whole,
Yeah. So I apply it pretty much all the time. I do a lot of cycling, and I'm always thinking how I'm going. I'll think about it while I'm cooking dinner. I'll just be standing there stirring something. I think, oh, I could just, do less and go up a little more in myself, from my feet to my head. I think what's really interesting is that with children, they're very good at pressing your buttons. And so just stepping back and having a moment and going, okay, I could just inhibit my initial response to that and re-coordinate and see if there's a new way. So I did try once. I found it quite interesting to do when my children were very little and they were having a fight about something or other, sitting there and battling each other. And I remember standing there and just watching and going, okay, I could join in, start getting cross, or I could just wait and inhibit and re-coordinate myself. And it didn't take very long. They just turned around, they went, what? Oh, okay. So it does it has an interesting impact, because it quietens oneself, gives you an opportunity to respond differently, but it also changes the way that other people turn and see you. And that I find really interesting.
Yeah, well, it's like you mentioned, everything is connected without any separation. So the sense of you just employing this state of presence within the relationships might allow you to kind of, even, I'm going to take a leap here, but come into a deeper state of being, and in doing so, possibly even love and understanding. And I think that people interacting with that deeper space, it's bound to have an impact, and that may even flow on to the people they impact,
Yeah.
So this is huge. Yeah.
So I think that part of that then, to me, brings up that question of judgment. And when we teach people how to apply this technique to their lives, the very first skill they have to learn is observation of themselves. And as we just take a moment to sort of pay attention to, it's sort of like meeting yourself right here where you are, with no judgment, no beating yourself over the head with, oh, I should be doing such, oh, I shouldn't be doing, oh my goodness, that's bad. That all of that dialogue can drop away. It's like, actually, It's just how I am at the moment. I've just observed some deep running patterns, and I can go, yay, okay, I've got an opportunity to change that right in this moment. And so with children, I think it's very easy to get caught up in the anger thing, you know, when they get very frustrating. But to stop and just go, I'm not going to judge myself in this moment. I'm equally not going to judge them in this moment. We're going to see what happens if we just go, okay, let's all just be here for a minute. And then suddenly they start laughing. See how ridiculous it all is.
Yeah,
quite funny.
It is quite funny and laughable. And it's interesting how it could have easily gone, like a situation like that could have easily gone in a number of other directions that were quite a lot more tense, you know, because it seems like there is another theme coming up for me. It's like this idea of releasing tension and just letting go again.
Yeah. And that's a really interesting thing, because if we release so much tension, we'll collapse.
Yeah.
So how much tension? So there's a balance of activation of being alive, combined with a release and expansion. That means we can move through life quite easily and freely and actively.
Could you say that last part again? Yeah, because this is interesting. So yeah, could you just repeat what you just said?
Yeah, I'll
in a different
try.
way, maybe. That was
so
good.
What I see sometimes is when people come for a lesson and they go, oh, I'm so tight. And they try to relax and relax and relax and let their mind go. And they just collapse and collapse. And I'm going, actually, no, you need to be a little bit more interested in being here.
Yeah.
So that the activation of our system, which is about being alive and in this moment, is not overactive and it's not underactive. And so I guess what I find at the moment is they're less active in their lives generally because they're sitting at computers more, and therefore they're losing tone. And then they get tight because everything's dragging. So then they release more and nothing changes, except they get more and more sort of discoordinated. Then when you start to get people to be activated a little bit, there's almost a disappearing of the pain, because we're now in balance with ourselves. Balance of gentle activation for a task, no more and no less. So relaxing and releasing often results in collapse. And so we have to kind of reframe what it is to relax. We want to be relaxed, but not switched off and collapsed. And that tends to be a state that happens a lot.
Yeah,
you just
definitely makes sense. It's kind of reminded me of this idea of Wu Wei in Taoism. Have you come across that term?
I have, but I don't know what it is.
Well, it's kind of what you just mentioned. It's like this sense of moving around about things with not no effort, but kind of the least amount necessary, and this flow taking place. And also, this kind of links up to what we were saying earlier around things kind of, I don't know, it seems as though as you're walking through life, if you can find this balance point in times, like obviously everything's constantly shifting and there will be kind of recalibration as you go, and that's a constant dance within itself. But there is a sense of almost the next step kind of presenting itself, and we're not going to know till we get there. It's like what you said about the singer and the position, you could only know once you're in that setting. So yeah, that's a very interesting kind of observation. And now I'm kind of wondering where the breath comes in, because I'm sure there's an element of breathing in all of this as well.
Yes. So the thing is that mostly when people are not well coordinated, so when I'm saying coordinate, I'm talking about their mind and body coordination. So as soon as they get sort of tuned up in that way, breathing starts to change of itself.
Okay.
And so, a good coordinated system will be breathing. Now, we can interfere with breathing. It's basically an autonomic nervous system will run itself. We will always breathe until we're dead, obviously. But the breathing can be disrupted by, somebody being squashed down. The function here is not going to work well. And so no amount of breathing techniques are really going to make a lot of difference. But once the structure is reorganized and the head is poised again, the breathing will take care of itself. Now, we can impose or put in place breathing exercises and techniques. But what we're looking for at Alexander Work is a good functioning natural breathing, so that anything else that somebody wants to do is coming from a place of good coordination already. So they'll be able to get more from it, rather than using techniques to fix up poor breathing. It doesn't always work. So, getting in underneath, it's almost like the thing behind the thing, if you see what I mean. So the coordination of myself and how I approach something is going to influence what that outcome is.
Yep, that's what you're mentioning or pointing to earlier in terms of the what's being expressed, or the expression of what is. And it's so fascinating. I've kind of noticed that, and this is quite a large kind of thought. It's this idea of like everything being a representation, every single thing. So every thought, every movement, everything we do or think, and beyond that, everything that exists is almost like pointing towards something. It's like a representation of something deeper, which is an interesting thing. So I'm wondering also, there's a sense of almost like either a requirement to be like Alexander, to spend all this time and effort experimenting with yourself, which seems like it's probably not the Wu Wei path of least kind of resistance. But then also, like, is there a need for someone there with their hands on you? Like, is there any middle ground, and can people do any of this kind of, can they begin on their own, or do they really need someone to help kind of in the beginning parts of the process or stages?
Well, for starters, if we were going to do it like Alexander did it, we'd have to make the same discoveries, really. We'd have to come up with the same discoveries to really make an impact on ourselves. So, but the hands kind of help to keep people on track. Okay. What he did find, and certainly we can have Alexander lessons without hands, and there are teachers who do that. What has to be addressed in order to learn it are the impediments. So I tried to sort of make this as simple as possible for when I'm training other teachers, people to become teachers, that we're learning basically 3 skills. However, there are things that arise as we learn these 3 skills that are the things that get in the way. So the 3 skills, very briefly, are observation, how to observe. The thing that Alexander called inhibition, which is simply to say no to something. Just go, oh, I actually don't want to do that. And then what we call directing. And that's what the energizing of the central organization. So those are the 3 skills. But what arises when we start to learn them is we find ourselves end gaining, and we have to be aware of that and see when we're doing that. The other one that we come up against is faulty sensory feedback. And so when we're learning the Alexander technique, we are moved into places by the teacher that feel really wrong. But they're better coordination, and they're only feeling wrong in relation to what we were doing. So if I give you an example, most people are pulling their head back and therefore sort of squashing themselves. As soon as we balance the head on the top and get people lengthened, they often feel like they're falling forwards. Now they look in the mirror and they see that they're not. They're actually really well organized. But their brain is giving them this signal that this is wrong. I feel wrong. And so what Alexander found was that that little thing that keeps telling me that I'm wrong will always get in our way of being able to move somewhere new. So until we learn how to really move ourselves to inhibit really that little thing that goes, that's wrong, I can't do that, I must feel right, because that'll be back to our habit. If I feel wrong, maybe this is something new. I have to keep on energizing this direction. That's where the hands can help. And we go, well, actually, you're here. See if you can abide with this for a moment. Notice it. See how different it is. As we do it more, it becomes more accurate and our brain no longer sees it as wrong. And one of Alexander's very early students said that the process of learning the Alexander technique is one of reasoning from the known to the unknown. Because if we don't know it's even there, the possibility that I could move in this direction, we will never go and do it ourselves. Now, Alexander must have been quite extraordinary because he did do that. And that's the thing that without hands is very difficult for a student to do themselves.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I'm kind of relating it to something as simple as an itch while meditating and not reactively scratching it. So this idea of like kind of calming down that reactive function seems to be coming up over and over again.
Yep. Yeah.
And then, yeah, finding that little space in there where you can maybe just sit with the initial discomfort for a moment, rather than have to do something about it.
Yeah. And so what we do then is we say, well, okay, you notice this strange or unfamiliar sensation. That's your proprioceptive center of your brain giving you some interesting feedback. As long as it doesn't include pain, it's okay. And then you start to notice how it's actually not really a physical thing. It's actually my mind that's more agitated about it than my body. My body's actually feeling quite comfortable here, but my brain's going, wrong, 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 move yourself. So it becomes a change of thinking pattern. Thinking and moving again, it's interrelated. And we start to see our mental patterns as well, our thinking patterns.
Yeah, it is fascinating. Yeah, kind of. I was just talking to someone earlier around this idea of not knowing where one might be heading in life and being okay with that sense, like sitting in that seat rather than having to grasp at the idea of knowing or desperately struggle in that space, which then brings along other forms of tension and suffering, and I'm sure even in the physical sense as well, because everything translates.
Absolutely.
So you must see, sorry.
Yeah, go on.
I was just thinking that you must see these kind of immense transformations with people from these kind of tight, kind of clasped beings into these kind of, butterflies spreading their wings eventually. Like I'm sure you've seen many of this kind of thing.
Yes, it's amazing what it can do for people. And I look back for myself and I go, wow, I'm not that same person. I don't seem to be that same person.
Yeah.
And certainly people really do transform.
Yeah. Be interesting looking back at your own life before and after. And I mean, it's an interesting thing to do anyways, to look at all the lives we've lived within this one and how that's always kind of emerging. I'm curious to know if there's anything at the moment that's quite alive for you in your explorations or in your learnings.
Oh, all the time. I mean, I can't really pick one out. I mean, I always, because everybody's so different, a student will come along, a new person will come along for some lessons, and I'll start and see where they're at, have to sort of get the sense of what they're doing. And I'm always amazed at how different everybody is. So then I've got to be really present to what's happening, because I can't have an agenda, because this person's different. How do I know where it's going to? Yeah, absolutely. And that unknown space is an immense space for learning. And it's when we can't abide, and a lot of people can't abide in that space because it's a little bit scary. And they'll bring their paradigms back in, their belief structures. It has to be like this because, and that prevents a change. And I see that a lot. And my job, I suppose, is to gently coax people to see that it's okay to go into that little room of not knowing. We just put a toe in there every now and then. They may not know really that that's what I'm doing, but they go there. They go there and they change something. They go home and they play around with that change. And then they come back and we go a little bit more, to change.
Joanna was describing an experience she had with me, and it's been kind of fascinating kind of learning about this journey with her. And this is where my kind of curiosity kind of grew, and it's become more and more alive around the technique. But she was saying that when there's like kind of physical touch happening, it's almost like there's a merging of nervous systems in a sense, and this beautiful kind of thing happens where you're moving as one or something. Would you be able to talk to that? Because that sounds fascinating.
Yeah. So, touch is immensely valuable. It's part of our systems. We value touch. And as human beings, we kind of need it to be good with the world, I think,
Yeah.
So what we do with Alexander is that we learn how to quieten our own nervous system, but then to direct our intention. I mean, you could call this chi. It's probably an easier way to describe it, but it's the innate, the energetic life force of upness against gravity, that we then start to learn how to actually use our hands and guide people with that nervous system. So I have to be organizing myself well first before I can put my hands on my students. Otherwise, they'll just feel intruded upon, pushed or pulled around. I don't want to do that. I want to get myself going well, that when I put my hands onto somebody's body, likely I can help their nervous system to go in that direction, to expand without pulling and pushing their musculature.
So how do you do that for yourself before you begin? Is it like what do you do?
Well, I do it all the time. It's that I'm applying the same tools that I'm teaching. I'm observing what I'm doing. I'm noticing if I've gone down here or I'm squishing, and I go, okay, I don't want to squish. Let me think about allowing myself to expand. And then if I can put my hands onto somebody's head and not get myself here, because this will feel horrible for them. I've got to stay expanded while I move. As we get more skilled at actually directing ourselves or energizing, let's say, it becomes, you can get really, really clear with it. It's like the baggage of the reactiveness drops away, and I could get very clear with my thinking so that I could, sort of help somebody to notice, oh, that's what you're asking. Yes, that's what the words mean. This is the physical experience of the words. So we match. It's like learning a new language, really. So that's where the mind and the body is really important there, because those words that I'm going to say to myself have to mean this physical experience.
It's interesting that you've mentioned the idea of words saying to yourself. I had a podcast a little while ago around the idea of the words that we say, whether to ourselves or when we vocalize them, as being spells. and even as we sing, we can amplify those spells if we're singing from this place of chi that you mentioned. So it's like, where are we actually singing from? And it sounds like you're speaking about the same thing, because I mean, if we look at that as being some sense of energy, and that vibration being kind of going out there and then harmonizing with another being, and that kind of, that vocalization being a representation of that. And I think, again, internally, the vocalization or the internal chatter is a representation of that kind of core energy that, you know, if we're not coming into a state of balance with or presence with before we begin, we can end up pulling and pushing kind of, you know, our way through life, and people feel the effects of that just as much.
Yeah. And we have to be clear about what we're saying, really, but also knowing that however we say it, it's never going to land the same as I understand it, because everybody's different.
Everyone's got different language.
Yep. And everybody's got different filters and experiences and all that sort of thing. So if I say something to a student, I'm listening with my hands to see how that lands in their physicality, because I might need to change my language. I might need to get creative about what I'm asking them to do. I might have to use a whole set of new words, because the words of, well, the traditional words are let your neck be free for your head to go forward and up. Now that means absolutely nothing, but somebody might try to do forward and up with their head. So they're going to do all sorts of interesting things. I go, well, that doesn't land well for them. They're not understanding what I mean. But I can show them with my hand and go, okay, how would you call this? What would you call this? And they might call it, I don't know, fruit salad. I say, okay, if it works, that's fine. If it creates this with your body, you can call it fruit salad.
Yeah. It's interesting because we're talking about something that's quite hard to put words around, and words themselves are quite slippery things when we try to put them around anything. Yeah. This is all kind of blowing my mind with kind of interest and fascination. When I was younger, I remember I was doing jiu-jitsu for a while, and I was training, and I was doing all these other things like swimming and weights and all these things to try to kind of boost that up. And I remember just like kind of looking at the way that I was standing and feeling like things were just out of whack with my body, but not being able to know a path to kind of bring them back into alignment or something.
Okay. Yeah.
And it was quite kind of an uncomfortable feeling, just kind of not knowing where to go and what that would look like. And it seems like the Alexander technique is kind of made for that in a sense. It's like a realignment.
Yeah, it's a how-to. It's a means whereby.
Yes.
As we call it, so that I can do whatever. So you know, sometimes I like to think of it as, you know, here we are, we're born with a mechanism that knows how to stand up. How does it happen? Well, most of us don't really know. You know, there I am standing on the ground, gravity's holding me there. And then how do I maintain this uprightness? It's a system that we've evolved with. And we don't need to interfere with it, because as children are beautifully balanced, usually, and in relation to the ground. But we interfere with it. And then we don't know what to do. Then we have no way out. And I guess that's what this provides, is a means to get back in contact, if you like, or coordination with that system that's in there. And we don't need to be doing the extra to try and hold ourselves up. So this has got so many parallels to other things that we kind of explore, that I explore as well. And there's a sense of like removing like the layers that have been put on top, based back to a purity or something. And also this idea, like we lose so many things that we have when we're children, sense of playfulness and curiosity, and
aliveness for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah.
Is like another one, but you're just talking, it's like you're speaking about a lot of things that I speak about on the podcast, but from this totally different perspective, looking at it from almost like entirely beginning from the body with the realization of interconnectedness. That's fascinating. Yeah.
And as you say, it's about sort of stopping stuff. So it's like we load over the top of this beautiful coordination a bunch of stuff for whatever reason. It doesn't matter actually what the reason is. But in the moment of an Alexander technique lesson, we can learn how to undo that stuff. And so it's more about looking at what I am doing that's unnecessary, and can I just stop doing it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's confronting for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's very confronting because we're in these kind of motions already, and it's like putting a bit of a block in the way. And I guess that's the question of attitude comes up. Like, I'm sure that would be quite an important thing. Like, you already mentioned the attitude of being gentle with oneself through the process. Are there any other attitudes that kind of are important to embody or to keep in mind, at least?
Well, you've got to have an open mind, whatever that means. But, you know, people do come with preconceived ideas.
Yeah.
And they come with, I like to sort of say, well, you know, we all have a kind of a style of the way that our brain operates. You know, some people are predominantly more pessimistic, others are more optimistic. Some people are highly critical, some are very, very analytical. So it's like they've got an underlying activation of their brain. Now, sometimes if people are really, really stuck in those, particularly analytical, very difficult to get them in their bodies. And sometimes can be very, very difficult to teach.
Is there a technique that you employ when things are really difficult to just kind of be a catalyst for that kind of new birth to take place?
Well, we do table work, which is really nice. You know, we put
table work.
Yeah, so we just lie people on the table. It's called semi-supine. Some people call it constructive rest. Lying on the floor or on a table with a book under your head and your knees up, so your feet are on the floor, knees bent. Then we just think the directions. We start actually running the patterns of don't interfere, or just observe, don't interfere with anything. Now think the length of my head to my tailbone, let them softly go away from each other, and start to, you know, run the patterns of new thinking. Can calm their system and bring them back into their body. But, you know, sometimes people come because they've been told that they should. It's usually not a good space.
Yeah. There seems to be like a like we said earlier about this kind of active effort as well as the letting go combined, rather than a forcefulness or something.
That's right.
I'm wondering around this. Yeah. So I'm wondering, there's links I can see with like Buddhism and yoga. And I was wondering what your personal relationship would be with these kind of spaces and maybe how that's evolved over time.
So I used to meditate a lot. My father paid for me to go and do a transcendental meditation course when I was about 18.
Wow.
And I loved it. And I stuck with that for many, many years. And then I can't remember why I stopped. Probably because I actually started having Alexander lessons. And I found that there was some really interesting similarities of that mindfulness, I suppose we could call it, that present moment thing. And then I've spent quite a lot of time doing Buddhist meditation as well. And I kind of find that there are some interesting parallels there with the grasping mind and the aversion. And this is a bit like what I was describing before. That, you know, something arises, we're about to do something, and we want to get it right. So our mind is grasping it really tightly. And if we can just let that go, we can then facilitate ourselves into that activation, that movement. If we have pain, we're often trying to push it away. And actually, if we can stop doing that, because that's another mental process, and we pause, stop that as well. So applying inhibition, again, just say, no, don't worry about that. Let me just stay present with this and my head balance. Can I change it? Does it change? So we're not pushing and pulling. We're sort of abiding in that space in between pushing and pulling, which again is that place that you were referring to. And I think it's like, that's the learning zone.
What about yoga?
Oh, we do yoga at the training school, and yoga's great to apply Alexander technique to. Anything is actually.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
It's such a fascinating sharing. And this is kind of like opened up a whole new world for me. And I appreciate you kind of sharing and kind of going into these kind of spaces, and, opening up about this and being willing to kind of meet with me today.
Oh, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's nice to just find something new like this. I'm sure you probably felt a similar way when that director kind of approached you and had that enthusiasm. And I'm definitely feeling that now. And I'm sure you've probably, seen that amongst a lot of people as well. So I guess there's just some gentle encouragement to find out more if anyone's listening. And is there anything you could share about maybe how people could learn more, or if people wanted to get in touch with the teacher, or about the school or anything? Just share away if you have information.
Sure. So there's we have a professional website which is called AUSTAT, or Australian Society of the Teachers of the Alexander Technique. Bit of a mouthful.
Yeah.
Shortened to AUSTAT. And there's a find a teacher facility on there. The training school is in North Fitzroy in Melbourne, and that's, people can Google that, find the school site and give us a call, or go on to the booking pages or whatever, and find lots of information on that site actually. And then, there are teachers around in Melbourne. There are a lot of teachers in Melbourne actually. So they can all be found, pretty much all of them, on the AUSTAT website.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I'll definitely leave some links. There is another curiosity coming up now, just quickly around this idea of like the combination of a few of these things we've spoken about. It seems like it's like a ground level building of a sort of potency of presence. Like this is like really exciting. And it's just this idea of just how nice it must feel to get to a sense of being in a body that's functioning well. I even feel like with mine, there's probably many ways that I'm certain there can be like little adjustments and it's also like a sense of love for your body, or something like a respect, or this whole idea of your body as a temple kind of thing comes up, and cleaning that and looking after it and caring for that.
And it's like it's really looking after oneself on many levels. So it's like practicing it all the time, and because I teach quite a bit, I'm really just practicing it all the time. So and I think that as I get older, it's even more important, so that I don't lose function, that I don't injure myself unnecessarily, all those sorts of things. And as we get older, there's going to be things that go wrong. Alexander technique's not a guarantee against anything, but it does mean that we can deal with those things in a better way, perhaps, than without it. That's my thing, is that as I age, I'm going to be keeping on going with my Alexander work.
I mean, it's an interesting, I just had a podcast on the idea of death actually, and that was quite a fascinating kind of exploration. But there's this idea of, I guess, there's a sense of this kind of way of thinking of kind of wanting to live forever or not wanting to age. But then there is also this kind of idea that comes up around living well and even dying well, and
For sure.
while we're here to, if we can have, I'm just picturing someone like withering away watching TV or something, and the sadness of that thought in comparison to like someone that's, quite alive even while they're dying.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing, and there's certainly some interesting books that have come out recently about Alexander technique and aging.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and it's a series of interviews with older Alexander teachers, and I read that and I thought, yeah, that there are things that happen to us as we get older. Joints don't work so well. Now, is that misuse, or is it genetics? We don't know really. But the more that we can pay attention and look after ourselves on all levels and function well, the better. And then when something does happen, as invariably it does, I think, then we have a way of being able to move through it without it impacting the rest of our lives unnecessarily. So if I think about, say, somebody has to undergo a hip replacement, for instance, the tightening and the protection that happens from having something like that happen means that there's contraction and it's hard to get moving again, all those sorts of things. But if we can put our skill of Alexander technique into play whilst something like that is going on, we can at least start to move through it and not carry on the tightenings that have been triggered by that sort of event. We can undo them because we notice them and change them.
Yeah, and what would you rather? Would you rather go through that hip surgery in one way or the other?
Yeah, that's right. Do you want to be compressed at the end of it, or would you like to be expanded and movable? Yeah.
Thank you for your participation in this episode of the Today Dreamer podcast. I'll leave links on our beautiful guest in the show notes section on the website, where you can check out all their wonderful work and offerings. And if you're interested in working one-on-one with me, feel free to head over to todaydreamer.com and get in touch. Also, if you're a part of the Today Dreamer family, which really only means that you've listened to one full episode and you'd like to go deeper to at least one full episode, then and you'd like to participate in some group meditation sessions online that I'm offering for free only to listeners of the show, then please send me an email through the contact form on the website. I'll add you to the list, and I'll give you all the details to that and any other upcoming kind of offerings around helping your development in this space. Thank you so much again, and until next time, be present, feel alive, and be well.